Well, good morning on the West Coast, good afternoon on the East Coast, and good evening to my friends in the UK and Europe. I'm Tom Strange, Chief Curator of the Carolina Music Museum, soon to be Sigel Music Museum. We're working on the last of the details on that to get that changed over. And today I wanted to take you through a quick tour of the Utley Brass Instrument Collection. The first thing I should say, and I didn't say this on Wednesday because we don't like to do too much shameless self-promotion, but I think everybody knows that we are in some very extraordinary times right now. And if through your generosity you feel compelled to send in a little donation for the Carolina Music Museum, you can find out how to do that at our website. Carolina Music Museum is on the web, and you can go to us .org and find us, and please consider anything that you can to help us out. So Joe and Joella Utley assembled one of the largest brass instrument collections in the world. It has been donated to the National Music Museum in Vermillion, and it's their generosity and kindness to have allowed this collection to be exhibited here in South Carolina, where the Utleys lived most of their life. So they were in Spartanburg, and they had a house designed specifically to house the collection, and it's a beautiful showroom house. But all of this is going to National Music Museum this spring and summer as we are permitted to travel and actually make things happen again. So during this time, while the museum is closed, I thought it would just be nice to kind of walk through things a little bit. And before I go into brass instruments, I did want to stop a moment and just say, well, what makes a brass instrument a brass instrument? What is it about that? And of course, the best way to think about this is, how is music made? Music is always made by setting something into a vibratory motion. So we're going to make something vibrate. And if we have something like a chordophone, where we are relying on chords, strings, then it's the vibrating string that's making the music. If it's a membranophone, then you know what that is. That's a drum, right? If it's an idiophone, that means that the music is inherent to the material itself. So a cymbal, a gong, a little chime. It's called an idiophone, and the music is coming from the nature of the material itself. A lamellophone is this, where like a thumb piano, we have a rigid vibrating material connected at one end to something. So that's the lamellophone. One that was fairly new to me is the quintophone. It comes from the quintessence. This is a synthesizer keyboard, and there is no part of this that actually vibrates itself. It creates the vibrations through an electronic recreation. And so here's an instrument that has nothing physical in the world about it. It's all being done through electrons and then comes out as sound through our speakers. And then the instruments that we're going to talk about today come under the very broad category of the aerophone. So an Indian flute, in this case, the music is created by having the air go through a turbulent point, where it then creates a resonance through the turbulence and vibrates down the length of the pipe. And notice that I can change the pitch by making the pipe longer. By closing all the holes, the pipe is now as long as I can make it. Or if I open up all the holes, then it's as high as I can make it. In fact, I can overblow it and maybe stop off a few holes down here and get an even higher sound. But this is one form of the aerophone. Other things that are aerophones are clarinets where you have one reed that vibrates, oboes and bassoons with two reeds that vibrate like this, and then what we're going to talk about today, the trumpet. And the trumpet works by actually making your lips vibrate as you press them tightly against some sort of an open mouthpiece, an embouchure. So you press in and you blow, and you can make a frequency happen depending on the length of the tube and the natural harmonic of that tube. If you have a really, really short tube, then it's almost impossible to get a sound to come out of it because there's no harmonic that actually wants to work. If the tube becomes long enough, then you can get at least one note out of it. And as the tube becomes longer, you can get more and more notes out. But all of those notes, if the tube itself is a fixed length, then those notes are going to be kind of fixed harmonics within there. So we're all familiar with the sound of the bugle and revelry and taps, where you've got the four notes that you're used to hearing. If it's in the key of C, that would be C, F, A, and then C an octave higher. How do you play the other notes? That's what we're going to start to explore. But we'll do that by coming in and saying, okay, where did the trumpet, where did the horned instrument actually originate? And of course, like most things, it came out of natural found materials that would exist. And our first exhibit is various ram's horns, shofars, and the conch, which is down here, the conch shell, possibly one of the very earliest of the horned instruments. And then in the back, we have two side-blown trumpets. Now, I found the side-blown trumpets to be very, very interesting, but in fact, they're played very much like you would think of playing a trumpet. Well, the normal trumpet, as you know, you're blowing in and the sound is coming out kind of directly in front of you. With the side-blown trumpet, you're simply rotating the thing. You're still doing the same sort of, blowing through your lips, but the sound is coming out of the end of the trumpet to your side, and then you can swing that around as you're playing and create a several notes, for the whatever celebration you're actually doing while you're playing this. A lot of these are signal instruments. They would be used to tell people to, come to meetings or to signal that something was going on. In other cultures, they were used to banish bad spirits or to encourage good spirits to come in. We're going to look at those in just a little bit. But these instruments are some of the earliest styles, and with the conch, how does it work? Well, a conch shell is like a spiral, as you know, that gets smaller and smaller as you go back to where the conch began as a youth. And so the spiral creates a fairly long tube in which you can get one and even two notes out of a conch shell. Here we have a couple of alpine horns. We have the folded alpine horn and then the alpine horn that you're used to seeing from the Ricola commercials, where it's a very long horn indeed. As I say, there's going to be a series of harmonic notes that you can get out of this. And with a horn so long, you won't even be able to do the technique where you can kind of put your hand in one end and stop it off. So how can you play a melody with such a limited horn? Well, we can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these horns of various lengths, and then like a handbell choir, if we'll coordinate who's playing what, and we're willing to play fairly slowly, fairly legato, then they can produce some lovely sounds. So here's an instrument that began as a signal instrument and then evolved into something where people actually produce fairly complex music, essentially using a choir of these. In the back here is the didgeridoo. We're used to understanding these from Australia. The didgeridoo, typically has, one particular note that it can sound usually fairly low because the bore is fairly straight throughout and fairly wide. So it's usually going to produce a fairly low, buzzing, breathy sort of note. And then we can actually add 2 or 3 didgeridoos together, maybe not all tuned exactly the same, and get a very complex sort of sound wave coming out of it while we would add percussion. So you can do an awful lot of essential music making, even with a simple instrument like this. And then the concept of circular breathing evolved, where people would be able to play these for very, very long extended periods and still be able to breathe while they're doing it. It's a very interesting technique. I do not possess such talent, and I probably never will, but lovely to look at and think about, and we're so happy to have these here. I should say that this entire exhibit was curated by Dr. Sabina Klaus. She's been a good friend of ours for quite a long time, and she did a splendid job of bringing together these trumpets, weird and wonderful, so that we could see kind of the whole broad spectrum of trumpets and high brass. And you remember I showed you the African side-blown horns. Here are some Central Indian side-blown trumpets, obviously fairly short, obviously intended to play but a single note, but these would be signal instruments. They would be celebratory instruments. You would play these to effectively make a great deal of noise, and it's quite representative of various emotions, so that they would be used in wedding ceremonies and such. All right, if we come down here, this lovely fellow here, the Bankia, another celebratory horn, in this case one where we could play several notes, and it's always done by used by professional musicians, with a shape that now is taking on some of the Western influences. The Narciga over here, another celebratory instrument, and in this case it's in the shape of an S, but it's actually flexible in the center here, so I can rotate this around and I can make a figure C out of it. Typically the way this would be played is that I would invert it and I would blow into the small end, and then the tall end would be well over my head, so that it would allow the musician to be heard over a large crowd, and would be very much desirable to be seen playing so decorated and beautiful an instrument. We have a number of the Karna from the late 19th and 20th century. These are also Indians, celebratory instruments. This is the tall Karna here, and then the monastic trumpets are going to be what we talk about next. But notice this fellow here with the two big balls in it. Inside those balls are actually some loose materials that rattle, so that as you play this, you also get the rattling going on. And that idea of having several things happening at once. In this case, we have an aerophone blowing through the thing, and then an idiophone, the shaking and rattling of the parts inside that give it almost a percussive sort of effect. These beautiful instruments are the monastic trumpets, and very much ceremonial, often played by the monks. And then these are the kind of instruments that are now there to sort of set the tone. If there are spirits, you might summon the spirits forward, and then once again, it's interesting how these are actually far more portable than they look, because they actually telescope into each other so that they can be carried around, and their full length is not much longer than that first section there. And then down at the end, we have the wrangling. So designed after the hollowed out thigh bone. These are actually ceremonial instruments, and they're made in metal. And so the lower caste monk would actually play the natural bone, the thigh bone. The upper caste monks would use the more highly decorated imitation of that. And these had two real purposes. One is to welcome the spirits who might be sort of wrathful but would be on your side, and to banish away all the evil spirits. And we have three different examples here, and then a fourth at the top from Tibet. Lovely instruments to look at. Notice all the enameling and the decoration. These are obviously as much to be seen as to be played. And that's something that would actually enter into Western thought as well, particularly in the before the Renaissance, the medieval period. The way a thing looked was as important as the way a thing sounded. We appreciate everybody's patience as we're learning how to do this. I would just describe real quickly, we have a couple of relatively inexpensive tripods, and we have gaffer taped them to a board, and it's on a moving dolly, and that's our technology. So, we're making it work, guys, we're making it work. So now we're going to move into some Western instruments, and the natural flow would take us to the hunting horns first, but because I'm already here, I just want to start off with this pair of keyed bugles. These are actually beautiful. And I've been saying the whole time that if you have a length of tube, then there are some natural harmonics that you can play, and then the notes in between, you can't really play them. If you can change the length of the tube, then you can play the notes that are more in between. And if you can change the length of the tube sufficiently, you can play what we call a whole chromatic scale. You can play every note in the scale. This was something that was desired but not achieved until the 19th century. So in the 18th century, composers would likely write for the horned instruments in the notes that they knew that they could get out. And then the musicians would carry crooks with them to artificially change the length of the instrument, so that if there were notes that were coming up that weren't natural to the way it was originally done, they could bring those in. The crooks work real well, but if you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 crooks going at a time, it becomes much more difficult to play the instrument, and it's all but impossible to change quickly. So if you're moving up through the music very quickly and we're looking for a lot of notes, how do you do it? Why don't we put on something that looks like holes in the tube to effectively shorten the tube, so that if I press down on all the keys, I'll have my tube at the full length, and if I begin to let off on keys, the length begins to shorten. This is pretty cool. And here's a pair of mid-19th century keyed bugles. This one is a presentation bugle, wonderfully chased and engraved around the bell. And then a very important keyed bugle from 1820, rebuilt after 1830, possibly American. These would begin to form the core of band instruments. And yet there was an alternative way of doing things, and that would be, let's go back to that idea of the crook, but why don't I put in a valve so that I can valve into that crook and lengthen my horn, or valve out and shorten my horn. It produces a little bit richer sound with the keyed bugles with these holes in them. It actually changes the timbre of the sound as you're playing. So it doesn't all sound the same. With a valved instrument, it begins to sound more like the same, and some of the higher notes become truer. This is a keyed trumpet, essentially the same kind of concept. And then over here, as Deborah rotates, here's an over-the-shoulder cornet. So the way this one would be played is, you can see the mouthpiece, you're playing into the mouthpiece, the tube goes over your shoulder and then points backwards. And these form the core of a great many Civil War bands. It was extremely popular. And because the keyed instruments came first and the valves came afterwards, there were musicians who were traditionalists that were a little bit resistant to immediately making the change. So here's one that has both a set of keys, as you can see on one side, and then on the left-hand side, there's the valves. And you can see the tubes coming out for the various crook sizes. So here's an instrument that was meant to be played by anyone that wanted it. It's kind of a neat marketing tool. Whatever you like, you can get here. So we have a hunting horn here from 1755, and another one here from 1684. Beautifully decorated around the bell, as you can see. And so in a hunting horn, this is very much a signal instrument. So we're here, we're signaling, that we found the fox, or we're moving in this direction to find the fox, or the hunt has begun, or the hunt has ended. We got the fox, and it calls in all the horsemen who may be scattered all over the field. You can easily play one note out of these. Sometimes you can get two notes out. I suspect with the brass one, that's quite long enough to get two good notes. Imagine you're on a horse, though. And so this is an instrument designed to be comfortable, to be very, very portable, and to do a very, very simple job. The beautiful decoration that these have, indicated just how popular, going after the foxes was. The horses and hounds were hugely important to the aristocracy, and so to have these kind of ceremonial horns that could be seen was just another way of showing off your wealth. So from 1850, the cornet with pistons, and what's another way of changing the length of your tubes? Well, you can see the tubes here. Those are the various crooks there, and then these valves actually open or close those crooks to change again the length of the tube. In this case, however, rather than rotary valves opening things up, we have pistons that come down and open the tube up. Pistons, as it turns out, if you do a really good job with making the seals and just beautiful execution and workmanship, these work very smoothly and they work very, very repeatedly. And so the piston idea is something that very much caught on, and a great many instruments today. The trumpet that you see, obviously a piston type instrument, but keys and rotary valves are also still used as needed. So here is an instrument that is kind of in both worlds. It's obviously got a cupped mouthpiece, so we're going to blow into it like a horn. But notice that we are fingering the holes here with our fingers, almost like a woodwind. So, and in fact, this one is made of brass, but it's almost unique. Most of the serpents, and the museum has one of its own now, most of the serpents are wood. It would be easy to take wood, cut it in half, hollow it out, glue it back together, and make this wonderful shape. And then you can make a very interesting sounding instrument that doesn't sound like a brass instrument, doesn't sound quite like a woodwind either. It's its own thing. So, the serpent, visually striking, and then orally very, very interesting. So as we move into here, we're into now the more modern instruments. Joe Utley was a proficient trumpet player, and he enjoyed them tremendously. From 1917, this is the echo trumpet. So it looks a little bit like a trumpet, yes, but then there's more to it. There's these other this whole other set of tubes coming out that we don't normally expect to see. And then notice that it closes off with this little bell. So if you go on YouTube and watch the demonstrations of the echo trumpet, or echo cornet in this case, it's really interesting to see how this sounds. It's a peculiar effect. Did it catch on? Well, at the time it was fairly popular, and a number of these were made. Ultimately, it didn't really survive as an instrument, and we don't see these very often at all. But it produces a very, very interesting musical effect. So go on YouTube and check it out. Coming down, we're starting to see instruments that we've almost seen before. You've seen the trombone. The mini trombone or slide trumpet is represented here, working very much like a trombone. We now increase the length of the tube by simply sliding a slide forward, and now we can play all the notes that you wanted to play. Quite simply, it relies on the accuracy of the musician bringing that slide into just the right place to make sure he hits the note. More effective, perhaps, is the trumpet. And this is a trumpet designed after Dizzy Gillespie's, who he claimed was once bent, and then he liked it with the bell up. I'm not sure that that's how that really happened, but we'll go with the story and say that this one was designed after that. Trumpet in B flat, made in 1985. I think it's showy. Does it change the music much at all? And the answer is no, not so much. But it's a very interesting sort of instrument. And then swinging around, we have two instruments from the jazz era in the 20s and 30s, 1925 and 1926 to 30s, the jazzophone and the normalophone. And here are instruments that we all are almost getting that echo trumpet thing where we have the muted trumpet, we have the full trumpet sound. We're able to play both at once. And you've got a little wah-wah device up here, so as you're playing, you could be playing the trumpet and then having an accompaniment wah-wah coming on. What an interesting concept. Again, an instrument that we don't normally see on stage today, but was probably pretty interesting to watch. And then we kind of finish up here with custom trumpets made by Andy Taylor and Ty Lawyer in Norwich, England. Some wonderful things. These trumpets were all commissioned by Joe Utley, and he was looking for the trumpet as an art form as well as a musical instrument. So while all of these trumpets are very musically competent, they were designed as much to be looked at as to be played. And of course today we're going to be doing nothing but looking at them, because that's what the curatorial powers want to do. So one in the American flag, this one that looks a little bit like some sort of a motorcycle job, and then at the back here, because someone had remarked that the trumpet was awfully heavy, the modern trumpet. The guy has designed it to look sort of like a concrete block, and when he got finished, he put graffiti on it, because, well, what else would you find on concrete but the graffiti? And so some wonderful instruments. I hope that you guys will get to see these up in Vermilion when they get there and they can get on display. As you know, they are enlarging the museum up there. It will be open, I believe, next year is the date. And if it's earlier than that, then boil me in oil and I apologize, but I don't remember exactly what the target date is for being reopened. And the virus thing may have put some plans off anyway. We were going to take the exhibit down middle of this month, and the museum is closed. Our curator can't travel back at the moment, and so we're going to just sort of wait, and things will be here. If you have any questions, I can go back and help answer those later. And my apologies for anything that I might have misspoke today. I know a great deal about keyboard instruments, and I know much less about horn instruments. So I'm learning along with you guys. Thank you very much. We are at the 30-minute mark, and we are going to go ahead and stop today. Remember, if not the Carolina Music Museum, find a museum of your choice and donate today. Everybody needs a little help at this tough time.